Roger, in previous interviews, we've looked at your early studies of philosophers and artists that led to appreciating the profound nature-based philosophy in Shakespeare's 1609 sonnets. And I understand this all came about with the complete reading of the sonnets in 1995. Now, this has led to the publication of 9 volumes. Wondering if we could revisit those volumes and look at what each of them shares in terms of understanding Shakespeare's philosophy.
Yeah, sure. We have, over the last 2 or 3 interviews, looked at Shakespeare's plays, at the 1623 folio of plays. We looked at it from an overview, the introduction, and we've considered the relationship of the comedies, the histories, and the tragedies. And we want to move on and discuss the comedies separately, then the histories and the tragedies, and then possibly move on further and look at the individual plays. But we thought it might be worthwhile at the moment to go back to some of the material that's been published over and above what might be on the website, for instance, and what has happened since 1995. And so what we find is that in 2005, 10 years after we discovered the philosophy in Shakespeare's sonnets, after quite a period of study and analysis and talking to academics and communicating with people around the world, I realised that I had something unique. So I set to write out what then became this 1760 page volume of about 600,000 words, 4 volumes, slipcase set, published internationally out of Hong Kong in 2005. Since then, we have republished these volumes. And so they're now available not just as a slipcase set, as a total set, but you can buy them individually as both hardback and paperback. And so we're going to consider those volumes individually and just see what is written in each of them.
So tell me about each volume.
Well, as you can see in the 4-volume set, there's the 4 volumes, and each of them deals with this different aspect of Shakespeare's philosophy. So volume 1, from the beginning through to the appendix material at the end, considers in great depth the nature-based philosophy that Shakespeare embeds in the sonnets, right through to looking at the numerology and even understanding what the role the dedication has in the sonnet set. And so you go from nature and the female relationship to the male and the idea of truth and beauty, and then what myth means in terms of understanding, and then through to other aspects of Shakespeare's thinking. What you find in the back of the book is that you have appendices, you have a concordance, there's a glossary, and there's other material, addended material, that plus a facsimile of the original 1609 sonnets. And so it's quite a comprehensive study of the sonnets themselves from the vantage of the philosophy as a whole set. And in volume 2, we look at individual sonnets. We look at each sonnet individually. We have a facsimile of the original sonnet, and then we have a modern English translation of the sonnet. The original facsimile of the sonnet is the default all the time, so any changes out into the English depend upon the going back to the original if there's any doubt. And then there's an analysis of each sonnet, page after page, 154 sonnets. And then after each of the sonnets is analysed, 154 of them, we look at the emendations that are made to the sonnets over the last 300 or 400 years, starting pretty much with Malone back in the 1790s or so, and becoming quite intense through the 1900s and through to 1990s, etc., with people doing stylometric analysis, trying to prove that the emendations that were made to the sonnets were required, and I demonstrate that none of them are required other than for a few obvious spelling mistakes. And that has upset quite a few of the traditional academics, for instance, whose careers are based on the emendations and their attempts to prove them. This is volume 3, and so in volume 3 we consider the 4 longer poems that Shakespeare wrote, the 2 poems early in his career, the Phoenix and the Turtle, and then the poem that was published with the sonnets in 1609, A Lover's Complaint. Also in this volume, there are analysis of 5 of Shakespeare's plays. Now, there's only 5 plays in this volume because I was only really beginning to start focusing on the plays and looking at the plays in some depth. But I do use the sonnet philosophy to understand those plays like Lover's Labour's Lost and Macbeth, for instance. And so they begin the process of demonstrating that Shakespeare used his sonnet philosophy. The sonnet philosophy that he published in 1609 is the philosophy behind all his plays. Volume 4. So in Volume 4, I was talking at some length and a number of times to a philosophy professor at Massey University in Palmerston North in New Zealand. And after a number of conversations, he realised that if I included all my preliminary material on people like Marcel Duchamp and Wittgenstein and Darwin in with the Shakespeare material, it would be even more confusing than attempting to understand the Shakespeare philosophy on its own terms. So he advised that I create a separate book to discuss those people, which of course I've done. It just happened that 3 volumes were devoted to Shakespeare, and now this volume here, the first half of it discusses Marcel Duchamp and why my study of Marcel Duchamp over a period of 20 or more years since making art in the 1970s keyed me to understanding the mythic depth in Shakespeare's work and what the female-male relationship means for that. And then in the second half of this volume, there are 10 essays, and the essays look at people who have attempted to understand Shakespeare, who have been fascinated by Shakespeare, people like Joyce and Eliot and Freud and Jung and a number of other people. Even Nietzsche, for instance, and Wittgenstein and others all had an interest in Shakespeare in one form or another. But even combined, if I combine some of these people, for instance, their differences don't, when combined, match the brilliance of Shakespeare's philosophy. And then at the end, I look at a few people like Jefferson, and there's a thinker like Ryan Eisler, for instance, who do have a nature-based appreciation and did have some considerable interest in Shakespeare, but weren't able to appreciate the philosophy that he embeds in the sonnets. And so when they talk about his works, they tend to bring in their own prejudices, etc., and that affects their understanding.
Roger, the 4 volumes is impressive that you've gone through, but curious, what's the background behind Shakespeare's global philosophy?
Well, I was in communication with a German artist who was living in New Zealand at the time by the name Merke Bonk, and a few times I took him the 4-volume set and sort of dumped it down on the table between us, and he sort of evinced sort of sense of displeasure or discomfort at the size of what he might have to consume to begin to understand what I was on about, even though he was quite interested in someone like Duchamp, for instance. So he suggested writing a summary volume, and so from 2005 onwards, I began to think about what might go into a summary volume. Well, this volume took 12 years to write, and it wasn't published until 2017. By that time, I had gone through the plays completely and had a much better understanding of how the plays in every form, in every way, conform to Shakespeare's philosophy. And so this volume has another analysis of the sonnets in a slightly different tone, a different way of approaching the sonnets, and then it has analysis of the plays, but not individually. It looks at aspects of the plays and themes in the plays that can relate to the sonnets. And so then it looks at Shakespeare's interest in the globe, and so Shakespeare was around when the theatre was moved to the south bank of the Thames and called the Globe. And of course there was global circumnavigation at the time, and so there's something about Shakespeare's understanding and what it means to appreciate or to write a global philosophy. And of course I'm suggesting, because of the amount of interest in Shakespeare's works now, all his plays are produced, that he really is the philosopher for our global times.
Intriguing. Shakespeare and mature love.
Well, when I was writing or preparing the global volume for publication, I became more conscious of what Shakespeare's understanding of love might mean. For instance, in Sonnets 32 and Sonnet 80, I think it is, he says that his sonnets will be remembered for their love, not for their rhyme or style. And he disses other writers who depend on their rhyme and style for their fame. And he said, no, it's just my love that will be remembered. And then in Sonnet 145, we find that he mentions, it seems by pun, Anne Hathaway. And in that poem, he goes through this process of hate, 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 until eventually Anne Hathaway, it seems, the mistress of the sonnets possibly, converts him from hate to love. And the more I thought about it, and the more I read the plays, I realised that what Shakespeare was playing with in terms of love that's beyond style and beyond form and beyond rhyme was a form of love that's basic to us, that is based in nature, that is based in the female-male dynamic, and is based in a real and effective understanding of the way in which our minds work in the terms he calls truth and beauty, for instance, incoming sensations and language and interior sensations of the mind, but particularly those interior sensations of the mind.
So the book is very aptly named, isn't it?
Yes, well, we're looking at or listening to or feeling for the deepest emotions that we can experience in our relationship to other people. What it leads to in Shakespeare's terms is, if you understand the content of his work, then it leads to the greatest contentedness possible. And it's that contentedness that comes over a lifetime, for instance. If understanding pervades your understanding, then you have the possibility of experiencing mature love.
This publication looks interesting. Shakespeare's Philosophy Illustrated. What's the significance of the quaternary teaching aids?
Well, at the time when I was writing the summary volume, there was a group of people were coming in, and there's other people that I was communicating with, and I was beginning to generate charts and diagrams to illustrate a number of the points about the sonnets and about their sonnets' relationship to politics and to social issues and to other issues in the natural world and our understanding of religion and myth and all those sorts of things. And so the charts that I've generated at that time, by the time we published this volume in 2017 or 2018 or so, I had made about 60 charts. And so they form the middle part of this volume, and so they can be shown on a screen, they can be used for the data show, and they can be talked to. They can be talked to at some length because there's quite a bit of detail and quite a bit of meaning in each of the charts. But they're visual aids effectively to be used in teaching situations. The first half or the first part of the volume, there is what I call a balloon-style commentary around the sonnets. Now, I did that with the plays. I think we've shown you the book on the plays. And similarly, these sonnets, which is a facsimile of the original sonnets, surrounded by balloon-type commentaries, can also be shown on the screen and then talked to. So details of the sonnets can be looked at closely, and you can see the consistency between the interpretation and the wording of the sonnets. In the third part of the volume, there's a consideration of what I call enigmatic artworks that seem to resist style or form or other art historical conventions or categorization. And things like the Mona Lisa or the Venus of Willendorf and a number of other works that historically just seem to sit above those characterizations. And the interesting thing is that Marcel Duchamp's work is also in that category. And the one work that he focused on was Leonardo's Mona Lisa. He made a version of it in 1919 and then another version in 1965. And it was while I was participating in an exhibition on Duchamp at the Eden Gallery in Wellington at the Victoria University a couple of years ago that I realised that Duchamp actually understood what it was about the Mona Lisa that gave it its amazing presence in the art world, why it's such a singular work and why it's the only work of Leonardo's that is anything like it. And so there's an essay in the back of this volume that explains how the Mona Lisa works, uniquely, I think. Even Duchamp intimated how it worked, but I think I've managed to explain how it works.
The penultimate publication.
Yes, this is the 8th volume. There's a number of essays that I've been writing over the period that I was preparing the other volumes, and there's some more recent material. So the first half of the volume is an analysis of what it means to understand various issues using the nature template. So it's a way to look at the nature template that I derived from the sonnets and how to apply that nature template to issues like the relationship between God and nature, between sex and gender, between fact and fiction, and a number of other concerning psychological/philosophical issues that we have encountered over the last number of years or decades, etc., etc. And then in the second half, there's an essay on democracy and there's an essay on the relationship between the male and the female. And then the volume is completed by 4 essays that I wrote about the relationship between tertiary and quaternary. And these came out of a conference that I attended in Hamilton when I was invited to give a paper. And in our correspondence with the person who put on the conference, Michael Peters, he was asking questions and I was able to attempt to explain what is the distinction, what is the difference that I consider that quaternary offers that tertiary fails to offer, especially in the understanding of Shakespeare's works.
And is this last volume, this massive volume, the publishing tour de force?
When it came to writing a commentary around all the plays in the 1623 folio, I wanted to respect the original edition. I wanted to use a facsimile of the original edition, and I wanted also to write a balloon-style commentary as I had around the sonnets for the quaternary aids edition, the Shakespeare's Philosophy Illustrated. And over a period of 10 years, I wrote the commentaries, and there's 800,000 words. We have looked at this volume before in some of the other interviews. And so each of the commentaries looks at an individual sonnet in the order that they appear in the 1623 folio. And Shakespeare's philosophy is used all the time. Only Shakespeare's philosophy is used to understand how the plays work. And so because of the size of the volume, which is a Super A3, we have only a couple of volumes of it, a couple of copies of it, I should say. But what I have done, as I've mentioned before, and I think we've actually put up onto some of the interviews, is that all these pages, all the 924 pages of this commentary are available on the Quaternary Institute website for you to peruse if you wish. Take your time, because it probably will take quite a bit of time to understand them. So this is in what I consider to be the final volume of the set.
Again, Roger, belated congratulations.
Well, these books that we've been through today contain just about everything that I need to say about Shakespeare and his works. They are available online, as we've talked about before. They are also available to some considerable extent on the website, gratis, as part of what I call the Quaternary Commons. And I think another little point of interest is that the portrait or the image that we use on each of the covers of the Shakespeare bust. Now that's an existing bust that I made in 1998, and it stands outside the library in Stratford on Parterre, one of the 6 Stratfords of the world. And so that moment of understanding, sort of capsulated both in bronze, you might say, in paper, and also digitally, is what we're offering for people to attempt to understand Shakespeare.